to please put your hands together and welcome Rick Dragon Search, as the author of Social Marketology.
Everybody hear me okay? Good. Okay. Basil asked me to say a little bit about myself first. That's not me, but I do feel like this sometimes. First thing is I'm a painter and artist, a fine artist. Okay, I'm 2 years old, but I still have a little bit more hair. I'm a jazz drummer, and I'm a writer. And that really is the edits on a manuscript I did for Social Marketology. So that's, okay, thank you. That really is the edit. I'm going to step back for a minute and actually cover some good old marketing 101 stuff a little bit. And I apologize for those of you who are art marketers who think like demographics are second nature. It's a mixed bag. But when you think of marketing, we have limited resources. Nobody has an infinite budget, and there's an infinite amount of people out there. So we have to make choices about who we spend money on. The tradition is that we do traditional demographics. We divide people based on things like age, religion, ethnicity, gender, all of these different things that we can sort of divide our audience on. That's good old-fashioned demographics. Subsequently, after World War II, people came back from the war with notions of psychology, and they started getting involved in what's called psychographics, or AIO, activity, interest, and opinion. So we know, for instance, that somebody as an activity might like to go play softball on Central Park. That's a particular thing. We know that they may have an interest in comic books. What are they really interested in? They like watching baseball. And that they have certain opinions that they think, for instance, that all Republicans are insane. They have real opinions about that. That's a psychographic profile that we can wrap around someone. We can wrap around their attitudes, their values, their behaviors. This is another component of traditional demographic segmentation, right? And then we also have geographic. Of course, we can say people who live in the Upper West Side or in the Catskills or in Alabama. It's another way to divide things. Behavioral is a whole other thing that's come into play too with segmentation. We have occasions. So that people having birthdays, people having anniversaries, people going on vacation, they're having occasions that we can talk about. They have certain loyalties or usage rates, someone who uses a particular brand a lot, or someone looking for a particular benefit. Now, this is a quick, introduction into the whole segmentation world, because what I'm going to talk about here is an entire different approach to segmentation. And it is not the traditional segmentation. It is not a survey. As marketers, you still want to do the good work with segmentation. It's research, it's brain work, very important. The exercise I'm about to introduce to you has nothing to do with that. What it has to do with is, as social media marketers, if you go through the framework of doing social media, if you use this exercise, it can be the centerpiece of your social media strategy work. The documents you create coming out of this can serve as the linchpin in all of your work. So when we do the micro-segmentation exercise in our company, we start off with a central premise. So we're working for brands a lot of times. In this particular case, we were doing work for a nonprofit that helped musicians in need. And when we first started off with the premise, well, the central premise is people who like music. Everybody likes music. It's too broad. We were like, oh my God, it's just, how do we start breaking off into smaller groups based on that? But then we realized that the real central premise is people who care about people who make music. So what I would offer up to you, if you do your own micro-segmentation piece of work, start off with a central question. Excuse my vulgarity, but who gives a shit? Right? Start off with that question. Or find a way to do it without being vulgar. I can't. Who cares? So we start off with that. And then you start thinking about it. And by the way, we do these as brainstorming, so we have a lot of people in the room. I found that if I sit down at the desk and I give myself the exercise of doing a micro-segmentation exercise by myself, I usually fizzle out after 15 minutes. I just am not very productive. It might be me. You might do a great job with it. Okay? I find that by getting a lot of people in the room, and if we're working for a brand, to get people who represent the brand in the room is a great exercise because they know their brand. So here we started talking about people who care about music. Well, there's people in the recording industry, people who do film, TV, people who have music schools, music generalists. And you'll start to see that by the end of the brainstorming, we thought about a lot of other people who care about people who make music. I'll show you one of the wonderful little things, adventures we went on, where we're going, well, there's people in music education, and then we broke this up, there's people at certain music schools, and there's people at Berkeley, for instance. And when we went back and we came back around and did our research, we found that there's a group of people at Berkeley that are into world music. Okay, better yet, every Thursday night, a subgroup of that group goes Zydeco dancing. That's what we call a microsegment. You might be asking yourself, okay, this is all very fine and well. You know, one of the definitions of segmentation in traditional marketing is that the segment isn't so small that it's not actionable. Okay? We're turning that upside down on its head in social media marketing. We actually want very, very small groups because they are actionable in social media. So another way to brainstorm around your micro segments is sometimes creating a matrix. So in this particular case, I'm showing you the model. We're doing work for a company that made little figurines, African wildlife. And there really is a whole world of people who love African wildlife. And there's giraffes in the bottom, monkeys, elephants, lions. And then we created a column and thinking about people's attitudes towards those animals. So there's people who are seeking to save or preserve, people who love as symbols, people who love as pets, people who study on a scientific basis, right? So by creating a grid, it's a very easy way that I can start to map out people, for instance, who love monkeys as pets, people who love elephants as pets. There may not be any of those. And that's okay, because I'm just generating ideas at this point of possible micro segments. So then what I do is, after we do that brainstorming, we've got this whiteboard, we've got a matrix, we've come up with all sorts of ideas of very, very small groups of people who might care about the central premise, who might care about my product or my company, and I'm going to put that into a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to document that, okay, and build that out. And this might, by the way, for a lot of brands, sometimes this is 15 pages long. Okay, that's all right. So then what do I do with that? Well, then I take that information and we start to do research. So we're going to do keyword research. We may go into Google's AdWord tool, use that. We may look at competitors. We might go into the various social profiles. And once we start to find, for instance, and we go back to elephants, if I find that there's a particular group around saving elephants, do we join that community or do we actually create one that's important enough for our brand? How do we participate? And then what's the role of the community manager in that? This is a look at the Google AdWords tool. So we've depended on a bunch of smart people in the room doing brainstorming, and sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes if you go into something like Google AdWords tools, I can see that it starts to give me other ideas. So people might be talking about African elephant endangered as a common key phrase that people use in talking about elephant conservation. Well, I didn't think of that, so let me plug that key phrase in, and it can help me find other groups in social media, for instance. As I start to do research, I might find a particular website, and then find their Facebook profile, and go follow that. And the beautiful thing is, for instance, this brought me to their Facebook profile, and that's all very nice. But look what happened. I can see that they like other pages. So this is showing me other communities that exist in social media focused on those key phrases and those micro audiences. So I've just found, in a few minutes of work, all sorts of very interesting other micro communities around my topic. Here I'm looking on the Facebook page, and I find that there's certain people who are having a conversation around an event for that Facebook page. They, in turn, introduce me to other micro groups around that cause. So it's a piece of research, fundamentally. This is going into the Facebook advertising tool, one of the neatest, niftiest little tools for doing audience segmentation that is free. It's freely available to you. You don't actually have to create an ad. But sometimes when you go in there and you start putting in a topic, it's showing you other concepts that you may not have thought about. And that's really what we're after. We're trying to find things that we haven't thought about. Because ultimately, we're going to find communities of people out there that we didn't know existed. This is a Facebook ad, to create a Facebook ad.
Okay.
So when you go into Facebook, you say, I want to create an ad, right? And then the tool comes up that you can input keywords into. I mean, some of these things are very, very interesting. For instance, you can do combinations of, let's say, a keyword and some of the other concepts, some of the other demographic segmentation that Facebook gives you. And you really feel like they still have a long way to go, but it's a very interesting tool nevertheless. The LinkedIn tool also provides some great information that I can use that to bring up some other concepts. In this case, I was actually looking at around an ad that had stuff to do with you guys, social media people. And it actually was sort of showing me some other key phrases and other job descriptions that came up that I can do research around. You guys, if anybody reads the New York Times, you may have read this weekend about Napoleon Chagnon. He's a very famous ethnographer, went down to the Yanomami tribe in Brazil. And before him, there was Margaret Mead, one of the great doyens of ethnography. You go up to visit the Museum of Natural History, the corner tower was her office. She went to Samoa and studied Samoan girls and their sexuality. And Margaret Mead got in trouble many years later. People questioned her. People questioned said no, because these people went into what they consider primitive societies to study them, but in the process had a great impact on those societies. So on one hand, you're doing ethnography, studying a people, and you're changing the people that you're studying. Sort of like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You can't observe something without changing it. And they suffered from that. And the other thing is they actually also brought, it's enough that as humans we bring our own ideas when we're interpreting other people. In the world of ethnography, that's a real danger. Our job, part of our job, is doing online ethnography though. And the cool thing is that I can back up, if I'm seeking out a micro segment, let's say around safety elephants, and I go and I can study a group and I can watch their conversations online, I can get a very good gist of what they're talking about without actually having an impact on them. So it's a terrific thing. So let me back up a second, because I want you to understand the bigger framework of how this is a linchpin. This microsegmentation work is a linchpin in your social media work. You start off first, you should do your desired outcomes. Your goals, objectives, desires, everything that you want out of your social media work, you put that aside. We interviewed all the right people, we did that piece of work. The second is to articulate your brand voice very clearly. You've done that, you put that aside. The next part is that identification of the microsegments. So now I've got this big 15-page or longer Word document listing out all these possible ideas for these small groups of people that I can deal with. Now some of you may have very central communities that you're already being community managers for, and you don't need to do this. But if you're trying to broaden your reach and have impact on other people, you'll do this work and you'll find all these other groups that you can start reaching out and communicating with, and then you can find out what they're talking about. You can find out who's influential in those communities and do influencer work. And all of that research forms the basis for a strong social media strategy campaign. Thank you. That's me. This is the book I wrote, Social Marketology, which talks about the microsegmentation in more depth. It's downstairs, available to you. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.